Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune has an interesting and rather long history. I first discussed the idea with Adrian Marshall, who was for over 30 years the attorney for Bruce Lee's estate, and with Dan Inosanto in 1986. The idea at that time was an all-encompassing work dealing with both Bruce's martial art as well as his contribution to action filmmaking. The working title was Intercepting Fist. Of course, as the concept grew, it was to become 3 films. The first was Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune, which is, as the name suggests, a work on Bruce's martial art. The film is a cooperative effort between Legacy Productions and the estate of Bruce and Brandon Lee, represented of course by Linda Lee Cadwell and, at that time, Adrian Marshall. The estate provided us with the backyard training footage, the Seattle basement footage, Bruce's training and research notes, as well as the various voice materials of Bruce. The Brandon Lee material was predominantly sourced from an Australian TV network. The Bruce Lee interview material was provided by the Little Wolf Creative Group, while the Dan Inosanto components and most other support materials were provided by Phoenix Films, my own company. Nick James, who was at that time the CEO of Media Asia, assisted with the licensing of the Bruce Lee movie clips. In terms of personalities, the film draws on the input of 3 key people: Bruce Lee, Brandon Lee and Dan Inosanto. It was always my intention that it would be predominantly Bruce Lee's work, suitably augmented with the appropriate input from Brandon and Dan. Technically, the film presented many challenges. The voice matching of Bruce Lee was a time-consuming and expensive task, but it was essential to the project if it was to be narrated by Bruce Lee, as was our intention. Another challenge was the backyard footage itself. Most people, when they see the footage, assume, because of the time period, 66-67, that it was shot on Super 8 film, but in fact it was another example of Bruce being ahead of his time, as the footage was actually shot on one of the very first types of home video recorders, which was a Sony 1/4-inch reel-to-reel video recorder. So rare and old is this tape that it took me 3 days to find out that there were only 2 companies in the United States that had the technical capability to transfer the footage onto a more modern and usable format. One of these companies was in New York and the other, fortunately, was in Los Angeles. They did a great job on the transfer and we struck a master copy on broadcast quality Beta SP tape. Bruce used this recorder to film many of his private lessons and later rehearsals on some of his films. I have seen some of the rehearsals he taped for Game of Death, but this was a copy and I have good reason to believe that the original of this was destroyed. My research also revealed that he had provided Steve McQueen with some tapes of their training together. But I would think it highly likely that had Steve kept these tapes, they would probably have been thrown out after his death, as most people would not realize it was videotape, as it looks actually the same as sound tape. After Bruce died, Steve sent a letter to Dan that I think speaks volumes for the type of man Steve McQueen was and the high regard that he had for Dan. The transfer of the footage was such a good result that I did look at colorizing the backyard footage as well as the interview footage, and in fact had some test shots done, but it ultimately was a production decision. Colorization is expensive, and if the money was spent on that, then other areas of the film would have suffered due to that expenditure, so we didn't do it. I first met Brandon in 1986 in Hong Kong. I was heading there on other business, and Adrian was kind enough to advise me that Brandon was over there having just finished work on his first feature film, Legacy of Rage. He was very nervous about his first feature film and was anxious to get my opinion of his work. So we attended a screening of the film, and it was the first time that Brandon had seen the film in its final state. Afterwards, he asked what I thought, and I honestly told him, "Brandon, the film is pretty bad, but your performance is good, and that's all that matters." I think he appreciated that because there were no shortage of people telling him how wonderful the film was, and Brandon, who was nobody's fool, could see that the film was not that good. At that time, he could not be involved in the project I was working on, but he did support the idea and gave me some suggestions and let me know about the backyard footage that he had seen. We kept in touch and I met with him again in Los Angeles, where he was a lot more supportive of where the project was headed. I kept him updated and he kept me in the picture about what he was doing. I called him after I saw Rapid Fire and told him that it was his best work to date. He knew that it was as well, but was genuinely pleased that I had called him to say so. I last spoke with Brandon about 3 weeks prior to his death, and he was so filled with enthusiasm for his work on The Crow and where it would lead. Brandon had confided in me that he wanted to move away from the action, martial arts style of picture and establish himself as someone who was capable of more than just action films. It was his intention, after having achieved this, that he would come back and make a big-budget martial arts blockbuster film, and I'm sure had he lived, he would have done just that. Brandon had a very good take on JKD, and I could not think of making the film without including a contribution from him. He was on Earth for too short a time, and including him in the film was the right thing to do. Part of the materials provided for this project by Linda were Bruce Lee's notes. Being a video program initially, the notes had only minimal on-screen value, but they did provide an invaluable guide to ensuring the technical accuracy of what we were presenting. I had some of the pages restored so they would look their best on camera. Bruce had a superb writing style and was a gifted artist as well. Some pages were used, but I mainly included the information from the notes at the start of each chapter and in the information strip that I placed at the bottom of the frame. And it worked very well. As an example, the notes I have included here are the 5 ways of attack, which are an adaptation of Western fencing principles to empty-hand fighting. Newton's laws of motion, which show the very real way Bruce was aligning his martial art to scientific principles as opposed to classical dogma. Punching and leverage. These were used in the Tao of Jeet Kune and show again Bruce's quest for efficiency. There is no mention of style or system, just an analysis of the best way to punch. People who conceptualize JKD as merely Bruce Lee combining martial arts to get a result are well off the mark. There is a lot more to JKD, as there was a lot more to Bruce Lee. Having Dan Inosanto contribute to the film was the final piece in creating a work that provided an accurate representation of Bruce Lee's art. Dan was the only man certified by Bruce Lee as an instructor in Jeet Kune and has worked tirelessly to promote and further develop the art. As a man, he is a selfless and caring individual with an enormous capacity to give of himself. Over the almost 20 years that I have known Dan, I have observed time and time again how people want to meet him because he was so close to Bruce Lee. But the interesting thing is that once they meet Dan, they soon learn that he is a person worth knowing because of who he is in his own right. As the film records, Brandon Lee gave Dan his full support in the way he developed and moved his father's art forward. It is a matter of fact that Bruce certified Dan as his only JKD instructor. But what a lot of people don't know is that Brandon was himself certified as a JKD instructor by Dan. I find it odd that over the years Dan has attracted criticism from a small but vocal minority of his former students who also trained with Bruce Lee. I feel that many of these people have attempted, in the best traditions of George Orwell's 1984, to change the future by altering the past. Of course, such efforts have failed. Dan's personal qualities as a man, combined with his enormous technical martial arts skill and knowledge, have ensured that the man Bruce Lee chose to move his Jeet Kune forward continues to do so. After the film was completed, both Linda and Adrian viewed it before its release, and were very pleased with the end result. But I think the film's best accolade came from Dan Inosanto. I was with Dan when he watched the film for the first time, and after he'd done so, he said that he'd felt as though he'd just had a lesson with Bruce again. At that point, I knew I had accomplished what I had set out to do. I could ask for no better endorsement.